I, 37 male, recently found out that my wife, 35 female, had an affair with our daughter's best friend's father. Let's call him Doug. To begin, my wife and I had been together for 10 years. I thought we had made a good life together. We have a daughter. We had recently bought our first house, and we were planning on buying another. She and I met at a live show at a dive bar in the city, and we ended up spending the rest of the night together. We actually didn't even exchange numbers at the time. We parted ways and didn't really expect to fall back into each other's lives. Then one day I was at a small Mediterranean restaurant and I saw her there. Both of us saw it as a sign. Something was telling us that we were supposed to be together. Ever since, we've been inseparable. We bought our house 2 years ago and moved from the city into the suburbs. Our daughter is 6 years old, so we wanted to make sure she was going to a good school, had a nice yard to play in, and had a good environment to grow up in. She's a stay-at-home mom, but sometimes she takes odd event planning jobs. Her experience in event planning has helped her climb to the top of the PTA committees. She took a lot of pride in the work she did to fundraise for the children. It meant a lot to her. It never would have crossed my mind in a million years that she would have found the opportunity to cheat on me at a PTA meeting, but apparently she did. That's actually how my daughter met her best friend. They weren't in the same class, but my wife and Doug decided that it would be nice for both of the kids to have a play date. They came over to our house because we have a large in-ground pool, and the kids wanted to swim in it. When I heard about the play date, I automatically assumed that it was probably just another mom from the PTA. I was kind of shocked to see Doug there. Now I know it sounds like I'm some kind of crazy possessive husband, but that isn't the case. It was more of just the surprise of it being a man over a woman. While my wife was in the kitchen, I stopped her and asked her a little more about Doug. I told her that I was surprised to see that it was a man she'd been talking about and not another mom, and she just laughed it off and told me that it didn't seem like relevant information to disclose their gender. I thought it was kind of weird for her to try to rationalize not telling me that way, but I trusted her, so I didn't think much more about it. In fact, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked out to the pool to get to know Doug a little better. As it turned out, he was working in the same field as I was, and his wife happened to be overseas for a few months on business. He said that he was just happy to have some additional company for his daughter, so he jumped at the opportunity to schedule a play date. He wasn't even normally involved in the PTA. He was just picking up some of the slack from his wife while she was away. He seemed like a decent enough guy, and knowing that he was married eased some of the concerns I had about him spending time with my wife. Maybe it was just because I was naive or too trusting, but I thought that if I was married and wouldn't give the time of day to another woman, he would probably be the same way. A few weeks had passed. Our daughter had really hit it off with Doug's daughter, and they were always wanting to hang out together. Sometimes that would be at our house, sometimes at Doug's, and sometimes they would go to local parks and things like that. During that time, I noticed that I wasn't seeing my wife as much. She was always either busy with some kind of PTA commitment or taking our daughter to hang out with her new best friend. It was a hard thing to complain about because our daughter was so happy to have a friend. However, during the times that they were both home, my wife was distant. She avoided being in her room with me. She would either go to bed an hour before me or she wouldn't show up until she thought I was asleep. Because of that, one night I pretended to go to sleep and I waited for her to show up. When she finally did, I surprised her with all of my concerns. I didn't even bring up anything in an accusatory way. I was simply asking her if there was something wrong in our marriage so we could find a way to fix it. When I brought up, completely nonchalantly, that it seemed like she spent more time with Doug than she did with me, she deflected and told me that she would spend less time with them. But she told me that I had to tell our daughter why she wasn't able to see her friend anymore. Then she went on a rant about how much it would hurt her. I was very annoyed with how she was trying to make me seem like a bad guy just for wanting to spend time with my family, so I just left. I went into my office to get some work done, but as I was there, I replayed the conversation in my head, and in hindsight, there was something very off about it. You would think that just asking someone to spend time with their family wouldn't result in a huge argument, but when I mentioned Doug, she just got defensive. I let my curiosity get the better of me, and I logged into her email. We have an open password policy, so she knew all of my passwords and I knew all of hers. Because of that, we also know our account usernames and information like that. Her email was pretty much clean. The only thing I noticed was a security alert for another email account. You know, like the ones that you get when you have a backup email associated with another account. This told me that she had another email account I knew nothing about. At first I thought it might have been a PTA email, but when I looked through the other messages, it seemed like she was doing her PTA business through her personal account. I couldn't think of a reason she would have another email account. Fortunately for me, because she had her main email as her backup, I was able to change the password on the new one and log in. Right away, I knew I was right to check. There weren't many emails, but there was a chain between her and Doug where they were having very explicit conversations with each other. Pictures were exchanged. Dates were set, and some serious promises were being made. On top of that, there were a lot of other confirmations for things like lingerie and sex toys, none of which I'd seen at all. From the looks of it, they were both planning on leaving their partners and being together. Doug didn't want to risk his assets, so he had to be strategic about leaving. And my wife never said anything about it, but I was certain she would have wanted to come out on top in the divorce. I printed everything as soon as I saw it. If she wanted a divorce, she would get one, but it would not pan out the way she thought. I would make sure of that. I slept in my office that night because I just couldn't stand to be by her, but in the morning, I called out of work and met with a divorce attorney to get the process started. It took a couple of weeks to get the papers ready, so in the meantime, I pretended like everything was hunky-dory back home, but when the papers were ready, I knew exactly how I wanted to serve them to her. She left for her usual weekly PTA meeting and I stayed behind with our daughter. What she didn't know was that I hired a sitter to watch her and I followed her there. After a few minutes, I walked in while the meeting was already taking place. She was shocked to see me there. The president of the PTA welcomed me and asked me to introduce myself to the rest of the group. I stood up, told them all that I was my wife's husband, then corrected myself to soon-to-be ex-husband. She was clearly confused about that, but everybody else in the room was suddenly very interested in what I had to say. My wife had told me they were all quite gossipy. I looked between her and Doug and handed her the envelope I brought with me containing the divorce papers and all of the evidence I found of her affair. Then I turned to the rest of the PTA and explained what I meant. They were all shocked. One of them even spoke up and asked Doug about his wife. Apparently, a lot of the women in the room had been good friends with his wife. One of them stopped me as I was leaving and asked me more about what I found. She wanted to make sure Doug's wife knew so she could also take the appropriate actions. She ended up giving me her cell phone number so I could call her and explain everything. In the end, my wife and Doug did end up together. Doug's wife divorced him, and because he cheated, she was able to keep the house, the cars, and most of their assets and still receive child support and alimony payments for him. I would venture to guess that Doug was paying out more than half of his paychecks to his wife. When my wife realized that both she and Doug would be out of luck since they were caught, she begged me to forgive her and take her back. She kept trying to remind me of all the good times we had, but I didn't listen. I went through with the divorce and she got absolutely nothing from me. She'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment with Doug while I kept everything else. I ended up selling the house and moving back to my hometown so my mom could help me out with some child care while I was still working. It actually seems to have been for the best because now, my daughter gets to spend time with all of her cousins around her age. She has more friends here than she did in our old town. I do still keep in touch with Doug's ex-wife because our daughters are still friends. Now for the top comments. OP, I'm sorry you've had to go through all of that. You had your gut gibber that something was wrong and several times she tried to lie to you and convince you that you were in the wrong. I think the most upsetting part of this was her telling you to explain to your daughter why she couldn't see her friend. That was manipulative, and a major red flag on her part. I'm glad you were able to get the evidence to ensure neither you nor Doug's wife were taken advantage of in the divorce. It's a shame that it had to end the way it did, but it's good that you're both out of those relationships. I wish you both nothing but the best in the future. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below on what you think. Take care.